how did you get access to relevant information on methods and tests available for the pest studied?
We have selected data on different tests through literature search. We have consulted various databases, including the EPO validation database. We have contacted producers to gather more information, and in some cases also authors of different publications for additional data that was maybe missing in the publication.
As the TPS was dedicated to on-site testing, we consulted the company's websites to find out what kits are available. Information was supplemented by literature search and direct contacts with companies.
One of the first steps that we took when we started our TPS exercise was to consult with a forest plant pathologist, because we needed some general information regarding the pathogen, that it was not really a pathogen that we were used to work with. So we had this conversation just to, as I say, to be put in updated, to be updated on the situation of the pathogen in our area, on the situation of the pathogen in Europe, on the literature that we could have found by ourselves. But of course, if you have a specialist that suggests papers and what to read, for sure it's of a great help. So this is the way in which we started to approach the information regarding Griffonectra parasitica, and after that we did a literature search, as I suppose every other TPS organizer did.
We started with the methods that were in the EPO protocol, and we also used methods from a previous Ufresco test performance study that we'd organised for the same pathogen. And then we carried out a literature review to find any additional published methods. So for this test performance study, we found an additional conventional PCR and 2 additional real-time PCR methods through literature searches. And there was also a survey organised by VALITEST of European labs to see what they were commonly using for the pathogens for the first round of the test performance study. And then we did a search for commercially available kits as well. But for Fusarium circinatum, we found there were no commercial kits available.
What was the major difficulty you encountered to select the test, and how did you circumvent this difficulty?
First, I would say that it was quite obvious from the start that a lot of effort goes into generating data on the test performance, but it does also reflect the richness of plant health area. Everybody is doing things slightly differently, using a bit different reagents, using different instruments, of course. And while I would say that this is really good for the plant health area, because it means there are more lines of defense against introducing a pathogen. If I'm not detecting it 100%, somebody else will catch a bit deviant isolates. It does have a practical consequence that sometimes it's easier to redo validation than actually collect the data. And even when you go through this time-consuming process of collecting data, it is often not really comparable. So although we have made huge advances, I would say, particularly with the validation database of the European Plant Protection Organization, now redesigned to make it even more structured. I would say that there is still some space to improve this, not only at the level of exchange of data among the laboratories, but also within the laboratories. And I think the next big thing is generating and collecting data in line with fair data principles to make it more easily findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable.
As there are only a few on-site tests, the first selection was easy. Abnormal results were obtained for 2 out of 3 tests. Since the matrix was suspected to be the cause, corrective adjustments had to be made.
So for the molecular test, we did not really encounter any major issues. For the serological test, the main difficulty was the selection of the actual tests. And this was because there was very little validation data available. So we really didn't have anything to go on. And furthermore, not all of the kits were available at the time that we wanted them. So that made it difficult to actually select a test that we would use. So in the end, we ordered the kits that we could get our hands on, and we tested those. And we selected the most sensitive ones. Although one of the difficulties we had, and this is also question 7, is that we followed the APO standard PM7-125 ELISA test for viruses. And this is also part of our standard operating procedure in the lab. In some cases, this standard deviates from what the manufacturer protocols say, but we follow our own protocol. So in that sense, the selection of the serological test was not ideal because we did not follow the protocol of the manufacturer. So in that sense, we may not have selected the best test for the performance study.
How long did you need to perform the selection of the tests?
So this the second TPS that we've conducted as part of the VALITEST project. So we were able to perform the selection of tests relatively quickly, thanks to the shared knowledge and guidance available. I'd estimate it took 2 to 3 months in total to complete this process. The preliminary studies took the longest, and that was just producing enough data that we were happy to make the selection of the tests in accordance with how each test performed.
We had about 3 months. We would have preferred to have a bit more time because we didn't really go into our studies as much as we wanted to. So we had to, we ran into some problems with the selection of the serological test, for example, and we didn't really have time to repeat these experiments. So I would say we used 3 months, but that is like the minimum. And you may want to have some more time to really sort out all the questions you may have before you are certain about which test you're going to select for the actual TPS that you're organizing.
This step is quite long because we were not used to perform all the tests. And in some cases, we had to adapt the protocol because the reagents mentioned in the scientific publications were no more commercially available. I estimate the duration of this step around 2-3 months.
Some protocol for brown rugus where detection has been already evaluated in our lab since the first outbreak occurred in Italy. However, a more systematic investigation on available tests was made starting from September 2019 to the early 2020, when the technical sheet was produced. So we took about 4 or 5 months.
I don't remember exactly, but I think between 6 or 8 months.
Did you encounter unexpected difficulties?
Yes, this for sure was that we did not expect, for example, that each commercial ELISA kit required different buffers. Our lab is small, so the first thing not easy to be solved is where to store all bottles with all those different buffers. But a more important question related to these differences between commercial kits we had were how to prepare a now plant material, and even more difficult question we had was how to prepare homogeneous plant material for comparison study.
Yes, we did, because as explained previously, in some cases we had to adapt the protocols because reagents mentioned in the scientific publication were no more commercially available. So we had to find new reagents which can be used for the protocols.
The main difficulty that we encountered was the high concentration in brown rugus in leaves and fruit that poses high risk of contamination during the manipulation in laboratory. Extreme care must be taken in all the steps to avoid cross-contamination and false positive results. Moreover, all the real-time RT-PCR tests highlight slightly non-specific emission in fluorescence at LHQs that bring problems in the interpretation of results.
Yes, one of the unexpected difficulties we found was that the primer and probe concentration in the EPO protocol differed from the published paper, along with the magnesium concentration for one of the real-time PCR assays. So we had to do some work to look at whether the paper concentrations or the EPO protocol worked more optimally for that assay. And we did find that that assay was particularly susceptible to changes in primer concentration and different master mixes being used. So that had to be explained in the technical sheet that went out for the test performance study, so that participants were aware that it was quite important that they used a particular concentration for that assay.